Jax, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intro. I'm going to put my Prezzo full screen, and I hope my sound is good because even though this has been a really challenging, busy week for me, I got another challenge because I currently have load shedding. So I hope that my UPS holds out. So I'm Jax, and today I'm going to talk about misguided design mantras. So those little rules of thumb or those heuristics that you use to make your design better, and sometimes they end up harming you. So let's start with the first one. Now, this is going to look like I'm trying to test you, but a couple of weeks ago, someone posted this question in exactly this format on LinkedIn. And I was like, whoa, this is perfect. This is exactly the kind of thing I need for my talk. So the question that they posed on LinkedIn is, which is the better user experience? So I'm going to kind of take you through my thinking and how I would approach a heuristic like this and see where its pitfalls are and where its strengths are. So the question that was posed was this: two screens, A, B, which is the better user experience? So I looked at it a little bit and I started feeling a little bit confused, and I was like, oh, actually, what I think might be a better question here is which of these design patterns are correct, or more appropriate might be a better phrase. And then I was like, well, in this case, I know that they're both loading patterns, but I actually also know what they're called. So the one on the left, A, is called skeleton loading or stencil loading, and the one on the right is called a full page load. So we've already kind of started unpicking this problem and starting to get to different answers. So let's get to the best answer. And I kind of was thinking about John Ive, and he likes to talk about the fact that when you design something, you really, really have to understand the material that you work with. And as Theo mentioned, I love making stuff. So for me, it's really important to understand the bits and pieces that you use when you design. So in this case, it's design patterns. So how does the system work? In this case, skeleton loading, and this copy is from Salesforce Lightning design system. And I like looking at this because the content is really good. So what a stencil load is supposed to do, it has a job. The job is that we already know what template the design is in. We know which things to expect. We are just waiting for the content to start loading, and then it will load. And often you don't even see this. It's between 0 and 300 milliseconds that you start seeing that. And only when that fails, you go into another error state. So this is a stencil load. Think about LinkedIn, YouTube. They know the structure and they're just bringing in content. The second pattern, the spinner loader, has a completely different use case. So you use a spinner when when a page is making an asynchronous call. So something happened, the user did something, and the system is now looking for a response. So it's kind of thinking, and while it's waiting for the response, it's also a sequence. Usually you use a linear navigation scheme when you start seeing this because you're expecting a success and a fail. And on both your success and your fail, you might have multiple scenarios. But we can make this even better by also showing the source page. So it would be, here's a thing, I tap on the thing, a service call happens, I'm spinning because I'm waiting for a response, and based on what I get back, I have a success or a fail. So that's the best way that we could be building out this particular design pattern. So let's go back to the heuristic. Which user experience is better? In this case, I think that it's a really good heuristic. It's a good question, but maybe the sequence of the question is wrong. So maybe we can ask slightly better questions, which is, what job does my solution need to do? Is it an event or a sequence? So the skeleton load was an event. It's waiting for something, but the spinner is a sequence. So showing it as a sequence would be helpful. Then which of the design patterns are relevant? And at that point, you can decide whether it's usable, and you should also probably test it. And then when you have verifiable evidence, you can decide whether the experience is good or not. So that's the first heuristic that I wanted to look at today, or the design mantra, whatever you prefer. So the next topic is one of my particular bugbears. I take real umbrage to talking about delightful experiences. It's something that really grates me. And I'll kind of talk you through why. And I'm also obviously very happy for people to disagree with me. That's why we have these conversations, right? But let's start off by, what is the meaning of delightful? Are you sure that you've thought about what that is before you say the words delightful experience? So a delightful means it's very pleasant, attractive, or enjoyable. So off the bat, I dislike this for a few reasons. Because it is, the first thing is delightful. How do I measure it? Like, so from a measuring perspective, I'm not exactly sure how I can ask people, oh, it's delightful. I don't know. Like, cake is delightful, right? And the other thing that I take exception to is that not all of the systems that we work on allows for delightful experiences. So saying that this is a designing for delight assumes that that people want to interact with everything and they enjoy it. What about grudge systems, like when you have to interact with banking or insurance? So I did an example, and I hope my video plays with me. So imagine there's a website, there's this app, and this app is called Nook, and the app's job is to help you buy and sell houses. Okay, so I'm busy buying a house, and I put in an offer on the house. So imagine I'm like, whoa, yes, what? Oh no, bad news! Your offer was declined. Now, if we say that I'm designing for a delightful experience, what I find is that a lot of designers start thinking about animations like this, right? So it's like, oh yes, and it will be so delightful if this thing happens. But the other question I often ask is, that's okay if it's one thing. Like, you only see this like maybe once every 20 times, to 20,000 times you interact with the system. But what if we decide to have a delightful experience where you have to wait for an animation every time you interact with the system? And also, the moment that we think about delightful, what other emotions are we forgetting about? So the insight here is, when you anchor on designing a delightful experience, you forget about all the other emotions that you should maybe be designing for. So the other thing that I dislike about it is that it's often insincere. So if the experience is unpleasant, the inherent experience in the system, and you create this experience that you're trying to make delightful, if this system was I always talk about, like, if your product was a person, how would it behave? And if I heard that, I would just be like, well, that's so insincere, and this would actually create a really bad experience for me. I would dislike the system more than I did before. Right. Jags, but if we don't design for delight, what should we design for? Well, I still think that we should be designing for what I always think of as the basics, right? That it should be valuable, it should be useful, it should be findable, it should be accessible, it should be usable, and it should be credible. And if you get all of those things right, then you have a good experience. And if you're really, really lucky, you can make it really desirable as well. And that's my experience cake. Also, I just love that rainbow cake, okay? Just throw me a bone on that one. So let's think back about this experience. So now, instead of creating a delightful experience with a beautiful animation, a fun animation, it might not be appropriate. So maybe in this case, the error message, or the message that the customer sees, is seller declined offer. That's tough. Buying a house is difficult. Let's see what next steps you have. Then there's a illustration to help us breathe, so that you can kind of read the different bits a little bit better. So there's a reason on what happened. So the seller accepted another offer, and then we're also telling you what happens. So for instance, if that offer expires, then your offer might come into play again. And then we also give you a follow-on action. So if I lost my the offer, then I might want to start looking for houses in my area again. But while I'm looking at that, I'm like, why am I sending people to the app? That feels like I'm still designing for me as a designer instead of for a better human-centered customer experience. So I was playing around with this a little bit with my pet UX writer, my other half, last night. So we kind of played around with content a little bit as well. So being very upfront and direct, which is kind of like, so you're not trying to batter anyone up, but you are giving the news. Bad news, your offer was declined. So that is maybe not as pleasant as some of the other messages, but it kind of at least get you over the hump and it's done. But I was also reading about like how we use instead of active, maybe passive voice, which people always say you shouldn't use. I've been seeing like a lot of really good articles around using passive voice when you are trying to give bad news. So maybe it's a softening of the blow, but it's still completely honest to say the seller accepted another offer. So those are the kind of things that I think that we play around with as designers to make our designs better. And that's why content is writing is really important to me as well. But I'm still forcing someone to go into an app. I expect this to be a push message. I want to get a message, get the bad news, and I might have an emotional response to it. And I want to feel that it's okay for me to then go into the system and see what my steps are and like kind of play around and see what I can do next. But I want to do that on my terms. So my terms in this case is I'm thinking from the perspective of the customer. So when we reframe this mantra, designing for delight, what I've just been talking about is how do we design for a good customer experience? So we kind of broadened our question to be appropriate to more situations. The next thing I want to talk about is how do I design for emotion while we are kind of talking about this concept of delight. So a few years ago, I was working on a homeland thing and I did this experience map. Whoops, sorry. So I did this experience map, and basically the top has the phases, then we have the tasks and activities. So this, I was just kind of walking through the inherent things that you need to do when you buy a house. And then we look at the wants. So what do you want? What can you do? So we're starting to look at the emotions, and then here's the emotional map. So what am I doing here? So basically, I'm looking at when I have a task or an activity, how do I map out the inherent feeling for this thing? Buying a house is stressful and it happens infrequently. So when you kind of start looking for a house, you're like, what do I want? Oh, this is so exciting. I can like buy a house. And then all of a sudden you start thinking about what house you can afford. And then you start getting anxious about like, how do I get home loan? When should I look at houses? Does this mean my Sundays are ruined? Then you get excited about what you can get. So we can kind of build a narrative on how each of these activities will make you feel. The one that I was focusing on in the example I showed earlier is offer not accepted. That is going to make you angry or upset or fearful, but it's not a good emotion. It's a pretty awful emotion. So what I like to do, even if I do it in my head, I kind of map out inherently how do people feel when they go through a particular flow. And when I design those interactions, I try and go and alleviate the emotions. So if I go, I'm angry, instead of being facetious and go, oh no, it's like, you didn't get it, we're so sorry for you. And a lot of people, including me, that would make me go from angry to livid. Now I'm angry at the situation, but I'm also angry at your design. It would be much better to go from angry to confused, angry to acceptance, angry to annoyed. So it's not a great feeling, but we are helping people to move out of a negative space in a slightly better situation. And I guess that's kind of how all of my designs are. I just want to make it a little bit better than it is today. But mostly, the message that I want to leave with people around this is how do we design better experiences for a range of emotions? And this is one of the mechanisms that I find help me. So let's quickly break that down in a summary. So how do we understand the emotions or the feelings that we can expect? We map the interaction in a flow. We conduct research. You can even just do a cognitive walkthrough when you map these out. Document the possible emotions, which I just shown you, and then design the interaction to alleviate the emotions. So go from anger to annoyed. Go from happy to ecstatic. So people then often think that when I say that I don't like delightful experiences, that I don't care about how people feel in the system. So like earlier this year, my husband bought me this beautiful Japanese knife for my birthday. and I love it because I love to cook, and every night I take it out of its container and I like cut my vegetables with it. I love how it looks. It feels so good. Whenever I use this knife, I go, this is a beautifully designed object, and the person who made this really cared about what they were making. And that is the emotion that I try to convey. That's the thoughts I'm trying to convey with anything I design. I hope people realize that the person who designed this really cared when they made the system. So instead of thinking about designing a delightful experience, I think we can frame this better, but designing to alleviate the inherent emotion in a task could already be better as the design a delightful experience heuristic. Right, so empathy came up a few times, and I wanted to talk about it as well, because I think it's a big heuristic that designers are talking about. So the main thing is have empathy with your users, right? So I take umbrage to users here, because if you say you're empathic, how can you like diminish an entire human being into a function, a person who uses your system? So that for me is already like a little bit of a problem and a heuristic when you frame it like this. And also then again, let's look at empathy. So cognitive empathy is how a person feels and what they might be thinking. I think that the example that I did around delightful experiences is really kind of helpful to as a framework to get a cognitive empathy scenario. Emotional empathy is how do I share the feelings of another person? And then the last one is compassionate empathy, where you feel strongly enough to take action. Now, I think a lot of designers are already in the compassionate empathy stage because we care enough about the work that we do that we are trying to change the world by the way that we work. So one of the most harmful ways that I've seen empathy being kind of misused as a heuristic is where people go, oh, I spoke to 2 users, they didn't like the flow and we're changing the project. And I'm like, whoa, is that really like what we talk about when we say design for empathy, or we should have empathy? Aren't we actually talking about that we have to have empathy en masse? We have to have empathy. I have to have empathy with 1 million people that use the system I design in a month. Do I really feel confident that I did the right amount of research, that I feel that I am representing all the people that use my system and not just 1 or 2? So empathy for me is just a big concept, and I think it's good for us to think through these different things so that we can like have empathy and use it in the right way in our research. Sorry, the second part is the research spectrum. So a lot of time people look at usability testing, which is the implementation or feedback research. So it kind of checks whether someone can use it. That doesn't actually help us get empathy. That helps us understand whether someone can complete a task. So if you want to kind of talk about empathy, also make sure that you do your feed forward research. So do you understand the why, what, and how? Do you understand the people using the system? So the other thing when we talk about empathy is that you kind of look at your audience and did you segment based on demographics and need. So don't just think about 1 or 2 people, think about all the people who use your system. And did you speak to enough people in each segment that you're comfortable that you are covering their requirements? Because for me, that's your job. You have to be confident that you make everyone into a first-class citizen, even the people who leave your system. So the third question I would ask is, does your decision help 80% of the people using your system 80% of the time? And very, very importantly, is the decision actively excluding someone else? So if you have an interview with one person that you particularly feel very empathic towards, if you make a decision just on that one person, you might actually be harming a whole bunch of other people that you should also be caretaking. So just very high level, when we talk about the questions you need to ask people, what's the wants, needs, environment, cultural background, age, worries, and concerns? Lots of things. That's things that you would find out in your research. What's the moments? What's happening in the system? What's happening in the life, the environment? Are they getting interrupted? Are they like going to an ATM late at night where they're worried about being attacked? Like, so those are the kind of things that I think is helpful for us to kind of unpack this whole thing about empathy. And then we also know that there are tools, right? What are the scenarios scenarios we use, the personas, and what archetypes from an accessibility, behavioral, or emotional aspect can we use to be better at empathy, to help us get through this huge concept that we're trying to get to. Now, I want to pause and just emphasize that empathy is absolutely crucial to human-centered design. I have no beef with empathy. I actually believe that I don't hire people in my design teams if I don't think they have empathy. It's a crucial thing for a human-centered designer. But the thing that I want to highlight is that, remember, it's a really big word and it's a really big concept, and we should give it the gravitas that it deserves. Okay, so I wanted to go with 3 examples to explain what I'm talking about, but let me quickly go through some of the theory as well. What are cognitive heuristics? They are mental shortcuts, or the so-called rule of thumb. So think about, don't judge a book by its cover. That's a mental heuristic. And it's actually kind of the opposite, or it's the kind of thing that I'm also saying. It's like, don't judge your heuristics by the cover. You should go a little bit deeper. Heuristics are simple strategies or mental processes that humans, animals, organizations, and machines, interesting thing from an AI perspective there, to quickly form judgments, make decisions, and find solutions. So, summary. Heuristics are useful because they help decision making. You just need to know when your shortcut is harming the clarity of your thinking, or much more important, when it gets turned into a cognitive bias. So in summary, this is my advice. Review your favorite design mantras. Check if it's the right question at the right time. That's the example that I used about, is this the right experience? The second one, don't be functionally fixed. Consider multiple scenarios. Don't design for delightful experiences. Is the subject conflated? Is it a very big subject that gets condensed into one line? Then I also suggest that you go and look at the rules of logic, specifically cognitive biases and logical fallacies. Get to know more of the so-called laws of UX, improve your analysis skills, and like I explained in this talk, use frameworks instead of simple heuristics. Thanks. I hope that that was helpful and that you learned something from it, and hopefully we can engage on this topic.
Jax, thank you so much. Lots of awesome insights, and your passion screams loudly through your slides. Some great comments as well. I'm just going to prompt everybody to please ask to drop their questions. I'm sure there's some questions, um, and 1 or 2 people has. I can see there's some awesome comments. Um, so we just wait for
Thanks.
those questions to filter through. That's that's so funny. So just to I guess to give everybody a quick understanding of what's currently happening. So Jax is currently undergoing through. She's currently experiencing load shedding. The next 2 speakers are also experiencing load shedding. so,
Fun times,
so,
eh?
so we're desperately trying to just swap things around, and you'll see the schedule change. But yeah, we're trying to pull goats out of hats over here. Um, uh, just waiting to check if there's any questions. This was really thought provoking, very insightful. Great comments from everybody. Super interesting. Chris is saying, keep
Well,
up the good work.
thanks. Also, if you kind of thought about something afterwards, I've kind of stopped using most social media, but I always check my LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me there and talk about these topics again, I'd always check my LinkedIn.
We don't have any more questions. We don't have any
Awesome.
questions. I mean, but if anyone does have any questions, like Jack says, there's one question. Let's see, Candice, do you have any,
So,
do you have any design or other mantras that you love?
ooh, I know I do, but I can't think of them from the top of my head. Sorry. I actually, it's not really a design mantra. I think one of the things that I kind of got myself out of is that I try to think in principles. So that was one of the
Okay.
things that I started doing to get out of this mantra thing. Sorry, Candice, I don't think I answered your question. That I don't have a better answer.
No, that's completely okay. Um, if there are any questions, please, everybody, reach out to Jax via LinkedIn or drop us an email. More than happy to connect you. Jax, thank you so much again for the awesome talk.
Awesome. Thank
Um,
you.